Hey guys, Coach Courtney and Coach Sam here today to talk to you guys about some lower calorie baking substitutions, but also dairy and allergen friendly substitutions for people who have food intolerances.
Yeah, so let's start out with some really basic things easy things to swap out, healthier alternatives when you're cooking or when you're baking. I think the easiest thing that we can swap out is probably the sweetener. So instead of using sugar or even brown sugar when we're baking, we use different artificial or even natural sweeteners. So my favorite to bake with is I use the Truvia. Brown sugar is what I use a lot in my recipes, but there's a lot that we can use.
Yeah, there's so many different brands now and different types and different blends of different types of sweeteners. You can get sucrose in a granulated form. You can get stevias. Truvia is actually going to be a mix of stevia and erythritol. So it's a matter of what you can tolerate. Individual tolerance is going to vary from person to person. And it's also important to note that sometimes when you're buying different forms of these sweeteners, you do need to look at the label because sometimes there will be fillers in them like dextrose or maltodextrin. So paying attention to the labels of what brands you're buying is important to make sure you're getting the pure form of the sweetener you choose.
Yeah. So for most cases, the artificial sweetener will replace sugar 1-to-1. So if the recipe calls for a cup of sugar, we'd use a cup of Truvia or artificial sweetener, depending on, again, your tolerance or what your taste profile also. Because some of them I think are a little bit sweeter than others, but most sweeteners will equal 1-to-1. Then another thing that we talk about when we're talking about calorie, macro-friendly, and allergen-friendly are swapping out flours. So instead of using a white flour or a wheat flour, my favorite to bake with for consistency purposes is an oat flour, which I grind down oatmeal because it's cheaper to do that way. Saving in the pocketbook as well.
Yeah.
But you can use almond flour, coconut flour, but there are some differences in those too.
Yeah, and so one thing that Sam mentioned is that oat flour is actually going to be a little bit more dense. And when she talks about blending it down, she's literally putting oats in a blender, blending it into a powder, and then using that as the flour. And again, so when we're using almond or coconut flour, it's going to give you, like coconut flour tends to have a more crumbly consistency, where oat flour gives you that kind of more smooth, dense, kind of cake-like consistency.
Mm-hmm. So then another easy substitution for like fats, most baking recipes will call for eggs. So if we're doing like allergen friendly, a good option for that would be a flax egg, which are actually pretty easy to make.
Yeah, so a flax egg is going to be for our vegan friends, and that's basically going to equal 1 egg white, or 1 whole egg would be a flax egg, and you're going to use 1 tablespoon of flax to 2 tablespoons of water. You're going to mix it up, and you actually want to let it set for like 30 seconds to a minute before you apply it to the recipe. But again, that's going to be a vegan-friendly option for a fat replacement.
Or even if you have an egg allergy, because we get a lot of those too.
Yeah, or egg sensitivities, that's really common.
Yeah, or if you don't have an egg sensitivity, in place of whole eggs, I will use just egg whites, especially if you're trying to save on fats, which if you're dieting, that's a big thing that we look at, right? Then in other ways that we can save on fats instead of using like butter or oils, I do use a little bit of coconut oil when I'm baking, but more so I'll replace butters with things like applesauce or pumpkin.
Yeah, applesauce and canned pumpkin really help with the consistency, I've noticed. So sometimes if you're using egg whites and not a whole egg, the egg yolk is actually going to be the emulsifier that binds waters with the rest of the ingredients. And so without that, using something like applesauce or pumpkin tends to get you that like smoother throughout consistency. And it's not an exact replacement for an emulsifying agent, but it's pretty close.
Another easy substitution, especially for allergen-friendly friends, if your recipe calls for dairy products like heavy whipping cream or milk, we use a lot of almond milk. Oat milk is great. Soy milk for the thicker, like when you want a more dense. So for example, when I'm making like the German chocolate cake, I'll use soy milk or oat milk because the consistency is a little bit thicker than almond milk or coconut milk.
Yes, Yes, and you do want to be a little bit careful with oat milk in particular. Like that one varies quite a bit depending on the brand. So you just want to make sure that you turn it around, take a look at that calorie label. And again, if it's 130 calories per serving, we're not going to want to buy that one. We're going to want to get the one that doesn't have a bunch of added sugars to save on the calories.
Unsweetened on all those.
Unsweet, always.
All right, so what we want to do when we're looking at artificial sweeteners, just make sure that, like Courtney said, you're taking a peek at the label, because not only are there going to be some additives in some of those, some fillers like the maltodextrin and dextrose that we need to be careful of, but if you are using a pure form of stevia or sucralose, they are going to be much sweeter. So we have to be really careful with that, just to make sure that you're not over sweetening.
Yeah, because different people too like different amounts of sweetness. I'm a sick person and there is no such thing as being too rich for me or too sweet. But for other people, again, it's usually better to start with less. You can always add more, but once it's in there, you can't necessarily take it out. You have to start from scratch. So maybe if you're using a pure form, start with half the amount you'd normally put, taste test it, and then continue on.
Another thing that we really like to use especially when I'm making like frostings, we do a protein ice cream with it, xanthan gum.
Yes, xanthan gum is definitely a favorite. So it's basically a thickening agent. Now, if you use too much of it, that's one that can potentially hurt your tummy. There's not a single recipe that I don't think we ever use more than a quarter teaspoon of it. You only need a little bit, goes a long way, but it adds so much volume and thickness, and especially in our protein ice cream recipe, it's like the texture that it adds to it.
Yeah. I also use it when I'm making a roux, like when I make gravies or other sauces, to bring thickness to them. It's also allergen friendly, it's gluten free, very, very low calorie. We're talking about, I think the serving size on a package is a teaspoon, and it's 5 calories, and we use, like Courtney said, maybe a quarter teaspoon in the recipes.
Yeah. And then the last thing that we want to talk to you guys about is to add another thing that we'll commonly bake with is going to be chocolate chips. So there's a bunch of different kinds now that are like sugar-free, differently sweetened. There's like 100% pure cocoa, like dark, there's semi-sweet, there's so many different baking chips. And so typically we go with Lily's. But again, as long as you're not buying ones, if you're looking at the label and there's not a bunch of added sugar, the calories are actually pretty comparable on different chocolate chips. It's a matter of, again, like kind of taking a look at, is it sucralose sweetened? Is it erythritol sweetened? Is it stevia sweetened? What can you tolerate? Which ones do you like the best? And again, just making sure there's not a bunch of added sugar.
There's an allergen that'll come into that effect as well, because a lot of Lily's do have milk product in them. So if you use something like Enjoy Life, those are vegan friendly, so that's sensitive to all allergies, and they're also naturally sweetened or no sugar added, so you're not getting the additives of sugar and the extra calories from that either.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys learned something about baking, please let us know in the comments. If you guys have any more questions or want any more in-depth information about this stuff, please let us know. We'd love to make you guys another video. Tag us in your baking photos or videos if you guys try any of our recipes. We have some posts on our Stacked and Jacked YouTube channel. Sam is a food chemist, and our stuff tastes amazing. We already messed it up for you, so as long as you follow the recipe, you guys are gonna love it.
Thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button and share.